Hello and welcome back to the Freedom Podcast. We are back. I know that there's been some questions. Where have they gone? What's happened? Don't worry. I said we return in January. Maybe it's a little late in January, but we are here. I'm back with Pastor G, and we're excited for a limitless 2025, aren't we, G?
Come on. 2025 is going to be an amazing year. And we're so excited to come into this year. As you said, a little bit late on the old podcast year, but you've been busy, Josh. You've been back in the UK sorting out everything you need to do. You've had a crazy time, but we are back for January and we've got a special one coming today.
Come on. Yeah. And I know since we last spoke, G, that you and H took some time off and went to South Africa. But you also, while you were over there, you got to go and visit our church in Cape Town. How was that?
It was very, very special. And we were blown away by it because we were there 12 months before. And 12 months before, there was probably, about 60 to 70 people, in the church, obviously been building church for some years there in a different location. And then, in Cape Town, I think it was, wasn't it? It was this month. So 12 months ago, they relaunched the church with a new strategy.
End of February. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's February, was it? And they launched it. So we got to see really 11 months on. We got to see and walk into it. And it's in a great school in a different area. And as we came in, you had people with the signs, welcome. We had the biggest welcome. And we weren't sure how many people would connect to us because there's so many new people. The church, I think Josh said it's quadrupled in this 11 months. So I'll say that again. It's quadrupled because it.
We used to have a double.
We talk about double.
Now we're going quadruples.
Oh, Pastor Josh Cook is making fun of us. He's quadrupled it. He's like, and it was just so exciting to meet the people we'd never met, but they had the connection that. Obviously, H and myself started the whole thing, and it was real special to us that they recognized that, and they felt a connection to us because it's one of our churches. So we loved that. We love hanging out with some of their leaders, and we walked into then the main school hall, and it was all packed out with chairs. The screens, the way they'd set it all up, the atmosphere, and it was packed. And it was with all these people, it was like the event was just excellent. Worship, people were passionate. I think the culture there, because you imagine trying to grow, you've done it, Josh, when you try and take a certain number of people and you grow so fast within 12 months, quadruple it. How do you maintain that culture? It's a big question, for every leader. How do you keep the culture that you have? How do you keep that concentrate of your values, of your passion, of your, whatever that DNA is of your church, of your vision, when it grows so fast and you have a huge influx? And from what I observed and saw and was a part of is like, Pastors Josh and Meg, they are absolutely doing an amazing job, and they have hearts for more. They have heart this year for them. They just got hearts for a limitless year for Cape Town and even beyond. But that will come later.
Yeah, it's incredible what God is doing there, and I know that there's big plans for what they want to do this year. There's excitement there, and they just believe that this is just getting started. So watch this space in Cape Town. If you're listening from Cape Town, we're excited about what's happening there. We just love our pastors there. Love what God is unfolding there. It is a great story. But I think there's a great point there, G, about how you replicate culture and going somewhere and going and taking what you have and replicating it. And I was thinking about that whole idea of what an apostle does. It's from a Roman word, isn't it? A Roman principle about taking the idea of the Roman civilization and nation and going and replicating it. And that was a part of what the apostle would do. And that's where we kind of get this idea of what it means to be an apostle, is to go and take the heart and replicate it into a new place, into a new territory. And that's obviously what a lot of our church is doing around the world, is going and multiplying that, replicating that. What are some of your thoughts about how we do that effectively? How do we hold on to who we are, and instead of being influenced by where we go, going and being the influence?
Yeah, that's a big question, because when you look at the different cultures around the world that we're involved with, it's one thing if you have, so let's take, the UK, for example. People outside the UK might think everything is London. We are, you go to London and you don't find that many sort of white British people actually living in London. So it doesn't represent then maybe a town that is in a rural setting. That is, again, the culture there is very different to an inner city. It's all around the UK. If it's north, south, it's so different. So that's just the same country. So when we plant church, we have in the UK, we have our churches represent maybe a different, culture. So Birmingham, we're in Birmingham, which is the second largest city. That is such a different culture that we're going into plant church, and you've got to acknowledge that. But then when you take that and say we're going to Asia, we go into a Buddhist country, we go into a Muslim country. You imagine us turning up saying, well, this is our church's DNA. So I think the first thing is you have got to be so aware of what you're going into, that culture, whether it is in your own nation. You guys in North Carolina is different to South Carolina, where Pastor Dave and Saz Thomas are building. And we've learned, haven't we? It's a mistake if you just think we can treat it exactly the same. It's different. It might be similar, but it's, different. And I think over the years, we've tried to learn as we've built, and this is part of the apostolic, is looking at the culture. And in some ways, you've got to have a respect for the culture. If that culture isn't, anti-God or anti-Christ in that way, there's something about respecting the cultures that we have. And we're not trying to go in there and change all those cultures, but also at the same time is going in and saying, no, this is a God principle, a God value. So with our DNA and the values that we have, like we will elevate, everyone beside us, above us, below us, that it's an honor DNA. If we go into a culture where women are really not valued and not sort of seen as there's a class system, well, our church is going to go in and say, no, we're all equal, we're the same, and we're going to honor those below, above, to the side of us. We're equal before God. So you've got to recognize what is the culture that is really unhealthy, what is the culture that is biblical, Christ-like. And so straight away, that is part of the thing that you focus on. And each one will have a challenge. So you might have more of a religious culture. So you have to come in and say, no, this isn't about going to a building or, certain types of people are allowed to go to church. It's like, no, Jesus came for every person. And I love that. Going back to Cape Town, we have such a diversity in our church in Cape Town, because in the past, with all its history, what we're seeing there, a unified church of people that would normally never be together. They would be separated. But we have got people from these different backgrounds, situations, different ethnicity coming as one church. So that you can imagine that for those guys in Cape Town, we will elevate. That would be a big focus. So although we have 12 DNA and there's a lot, what we'll often say to our pastors, what are the ones that you see as lacking that you need to focus on? Yeah. Don't spread the butter too thin, trying to spread all of it. These are our values, but you got to identify these are some key areas.
Really good.
Maybe you come from a conservative background where it's, we don't express ourselves and it's not the done thing and we speak quietly. It's like, hey, we believe that what God's done in us needs to be expressed out of us, and our passion, our wildfire passion, is something. It's not a cultural thing. Because in one way, you wouldn't think of British people. Like, people can't say, "Oh, that's more of a British thing." No, it's not. Some people would put that to say the South Americans or the Italians, or it's like, they're passionate and fiery, and it's recognizing this is something we want to build. So all the years ago when we started building Freedom, we this was in our heart. This was our value: was we will not be contained. We don't want to be British. We want to be kingdom. And I think it's getting away from that thing of we're this ethnicity, we're that, and this is the way we act. It's like, yeah, you are. But when you come into the kingdom is first. And I want to be a kingdom person. I want to be Christ-like in those things. And if my culture gets in the way, I want to come and challenge some of that, because he's got to come first.
That's right. And I think you're so right that a lot of people, even for us, they think, oh, well, I guess that where you've come from, this is what British people are like. And it's like, well, think about the stereotype of a British person. We're known for a stiff upper lip, no emotion. And it's that we're not representative of what British Christianity is like necessarily. There are, lots of Christians that are like us,
yes.
but there are lots that's not normal. But we decided we are kingdom citizens first, not defined by our nationality first. And I think that that's important for any Christian in the world to acknowledge and understand, is that we get our identity from the kingdom first, and that culture first, and anything else is after that. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. I love being British. I love the fact that I've come from a beautiful part of the world, the countryside where I am, etc. Mm. But that comes below being part of this kingdom. It comes below who God's called me to be. And for every one of us, God places us. It says in Scripture, He places us in places, different nations, different towns. He does it on purpose. God has this people placement program, and it says all for a season, all for a time, and He knows exactly where He placed you on purpose. No accident, and within that, that's how you impact. Where you are. That's how you relate to those where you are. So for us planting church around the world, you might send someone who is, not from that country. It's very important that we understand what those biblical values are, kingdom values, and our DNA really is perhaps it's all about kingdom. All of our DNA is based in Scripture, but they're peculiar to us, and that's where we'll say, we're a church of tribes. This is our tribe. This is our, our nation. This is when we get together. So we just had Leadership Hub last night. We're coming together as a group of churches. We're singing from the same book. Yeah. We're on the same page because culture unites you. We're not separate churches that all do our own thing. We've got like the same heartbeat, the same vision. We want to reach anyone, anywhere. And connect them with this life-changing relationship with Jesus. And that's what we're out there doing. And we will take this gospel and we'll get often people will say, oh, that's freedom faith. Almost like we have a different faith because, if we see it, we'll do it. If God says it, we'll go. And people think that's almost freedom. Mm. But for us, that's just what we see in Scripture. Is not, it's the way that we have chosen to respond to what God says.
It's really good. And I think as well, we think about that picture of Revelation and where John sees the people gathered and he sees every tribe, every tongue, every nation. There's clearly an understanding there that there are distinct cultures and identities that will exist in heaven. And this is part of the way that God's created us. And so we love other cultures and we recognize that. I think even as we're kind of coming to this, it's like, hey, it's kingdom first, but we still love the culture of other nations. I just think a great example of this is when we were in Rwanda together, and we were there for a worship night, and they did a couple of songs that we sing over in some of our British churches over here in the US, and it was really good worship. And then they did a song in more of a local style, and they added some of their own culture onto it with the dance and the way that they were singing. And the room went off, didn't it? And we were like, we want more of that. There's nothing like, oh, that was we don't know that song, and we don't sing that song in the UK. Is that we actually love other culture. We love bringing different cultural influence into things like worship and the style of how we do things. So we're big advocates for that, aren't we?
Yeah, and you mentioned an interesting point there, because when people think of the apostolic, if you don't fully understand the apostolic, they might see it as controlling. That there's, we apostle so and so, and we have this, and they're over the movement or over the church. But this apostle that goes to set up the culture, it's really is a spirit and an anointing and a favor. So that's why we'll have we'll pray for people that they take and they have an apostolic grace over their life, a favor to be able to know how to build in a culture. That comes from heaven. Like, as human beings, we can't always know that. So we have that. But we also, within it, we take responsibility to build something good and right. And it talks about laying the foundation of our faith. You don't want a weird thing happening where it's a little bit, it's become liberal, because our culture, well, it does allow, for example, it allows, in our culture, Christians to sleep together, even if they're not married, and it's like, oh, well, we'll let that go because it's more of their culture. You can see how quickly that compromise and liberalism, it comes in. Now, you might have that with the people you meet, and we want to be a church where people come into our church and they find God's better way for them, but we want a place for them to come in. And so in the apostolic, you've got to lay down very clearly, no, this is the biblical foundations we're going to build. And so there is a responsibility. Some people might see that's control, but it's a responsibility for the truth. So we build with the truth. Those are the foundations. But at the same time, there's something about releasing. The apostolic's releasing. So you've got the responsibility of building and saying, no, we're not building that. We don't want that. It's very specific. This is what we're building. We want to replicate what's good and healthy. But at the same time, we want to release. So we don't want everyone to do worship the way we do worship. I think we were very excited when we saw that. There was almost an attempt to do it, perhaps a British way of worship or American, or whatever. It's like the songs that we all hear, but they took it and they did it African, and that place erupted. And it's like that's where you want to release. You don't want to be saying, I'm not sure. See, and that's where you have the apostolic that takes responsibility for the foundations, but then it releases what is relevant, and it says, do you know what? That looks different. It sounds different, but it's got the same heart. And we want to release that, because people that are going to come into our church from outside, they're not going to be saying, what's your DNA? They're going to hear those songs and go, oh, I connect to it. So there's relevance that takes place. And that's really important, how you release. And the apostolic is releasing. It's the big part of it. That's why we have pastors all over the world, and we have more people lining up ready to go and plant new churches, because the apostolic fires out, releases. Are they all 100% like safe bet? It's like we've got these people and they're top. No, there is a risk where you're releasing. And the way I just put it down to is family. Within your family, the apostolic is really like the father. The father mother, father of the house that set culture, responsibility, their foundations for how we honor in this house, how we build together, how we communicate, how we eat, how we treat others, all this stuff. You build that into your children, and you don't you shouldn't compromise that. You're saying this is what the standards we have in our house, and the church is the house. And that's what the apostolic really is building a foundation. What for one day, when they become 18, 19, 20, you're then going to release them, and you're hoping that, they'll go and do their own. I don't expect my boys who've got married and have family to be exactly like me. That would be like restricting. It's not right, because each are individual. So all our pastors are individual. Where they're going to live, their cultures, how their call, what God's called them for, is different. Their gifting. So that then you have to release them into it, and you go, God, that looks different. But you got the same value. You got the same values are coming out, but the expression may look different because you start to impact even more. And that's, in a very basic way, how the apostolic works through our church. When you talk about culture and replication, that it comes with a responsibility, but also with a release.
Absolutely. And I think about as well, that if we almost synthesize this down a little bit, we're almost talking quite big cultural church building, pastoring. We're almost talking about more smaller interpretations of this. Maybe it's someone who's listening who's a part of a small group, or they go and attend prayer. What would be the ways that we would say, okay, you want to create a more fiery prayer time, you want to create a place where people are more expressive? What are the steps that we can take? One of the ones that comes to mind for me immediately is that you just need to have a bit of concentrate. Is that I can make a difference by myself and impact culture. But when you just give me one other or two others, we can impact a whole room.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's something about the concentrate. And I think a great example of this is that when we went to the men's conference back in the late 2000, like the noughties, what do you call them? About 2009-ish, I think it was, we were there. And we were there for a men's conference. There was over 2,000 men there. There's maybe 40 of us men that have come from our church, but there are maybe 15 to 20 of us that are the crazy guys, the passionate guys, the loud guys, or whatever. But we impacted a whole room because we all sat together, and there's this concentrate. And as we're kind of being passionate, we're worshiping, we're standing up in the word, we're fired up, we're receiving what God is saying in that room. It starts to ripple out. And we even have other guys coming up to us saying, I want to come sit with you guys. And we came into the last night of our conference with Braveheart blue face paint on. And we were like painting the camera. Yeah, we were bringing the culture, and it was wild, and it was passionate, and it was amazing. But you can be 15 people and impact 2,000 people. Yeah. But if you had sat those 15 people around the room, so yourself sits on front row by yourself, and I sit in the middle somewhere, there is no way we would have had the same impact that rippled through that conference. But if you concentrate together and you put the flames together, it's like coals of a fire. If you put coals, and how do you stamp out a fire? Separate the coals, just separate them, and the heat will go out really quick. But if you want to burn something and actually make it hotter, bring them together. So I think one of the things for me is that if you're starting a small group or something like that, get your 2 or 3 people that can say bring expression. They know how to pray. Bring them with you. Maybe meet with them before and say, right, we're going to bring it tonight, and get on the same page. Bring those coals together. Don't just try and do it by yourself, but actually get a couple of other people who are coals and burn with them. That will help impact the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, just going back to that conference. Do you remember they had competition? That's what I mean. This was a men's conference.
Warm-up competition, didn't they?
It was meant to be, wild. It was meant to be wild and passionate. So we just came, well, if that's what you're asking, we're going to support you, we're going to cheer you on. And we did several different games, and obviously our guys volunteered. I don't know if it was about 4 or 5 different, games, and we won every one of the games.
We were serial winners.
Yeah, and it was just because our guys, and I think I partook in one. It was like
I was going to say that you won yours as well.
Yeah, I can't. I think it was pastors, wasn't it? It was pastors that were there, and I remember. I think I raced around that auditorium, and I thought I can't let the guys down. I can't fail. I mean, the power of culture. It was powerful, but then it was abrasive to other people that didn't have culture because they felt offended, and it was just fascinating that what happens when culture, not everyone likes it. They're like, you're challenging me here. But yeah, it was a great time, and it was a big lesson to say, look what a few people can do. And so I think about as well when we gather together in church, it's like, who do you sit by? Do you know what I mean? It's interesting because who you sit by does impact. I've been by people that look half asleep. If you've got the guy who looks like he's dropping off or he's, slouched in his chair, it's not inspiring when you're around. You've got someone who's on the edge of their chair waiting for what God's word, what it's doing. There's a responsiveness. Something in you comes alive. And we did this some years ago with our young adults, our young people. It's like, hey, rather than all separated all around the room, why don't some of you sit together, those that really are hungry, get down towards the front, get ready, and it changed the atmosphere of our church. There was passion in that place. And in fact, one of those young people was our Josh Cook from Cape Town, who's now pastoring that and building culture, because all of this is speaking culture. And you've got to be intentional with it, not accidental. So you've got that, get a few people, prepare them, those people that can bring a spark, bring a fire. I think the other way is, if we're really being honest and talking about small groups, is you might have people that don't help the culture. For example, they always want to say something, or when they say something, they go on and on. And often it's the same thing or the same problem, or they want prayer for this. And it's like, we prayed 10 times for this. You've got to lead in that moment. And I've found over the years, because there's this big thing about, well, it's not very pastoral and let people have their, no, everyone sat there and they're switching off because they've heard it all before. And you have people that really have gone because they want that attention. They don't always have a intention of changing. They basically want to be stroked. And I think you've also got a responsibility not just to raise up the sparks and the fire that bring and help inspire. You've also got to shut down when it is being distracted, diverted. People are trying to absorb, or someone prays and they're praying for 5 minutes. And the best way is you don't have to be subtle. Just have a word with them afterwards and say, do you know what? I'm going to ask you to actually not share anything, because there's other people in this room that we want to hear from. And you have shared obviously before now. And I think just want you to be behind people that we're seeing come into the group and encourage them. So it's direct conversations, which I know some of us are uncomfortable with, but that's how I've learned. Let them know that you love them, that they're part of that group, but this isn't for them. It's about the group collectively. And probably you might have new Christians there. You might have people who are stepping into it. So we want them to be the priority. So it's focusing, how do we set a great culture where the newest people feel at home? They feel it's not about you getting what you want. It's about us coming and having fellowship together as a group.
Yeah. And I think as well, one of the things that we can do as leaders sometimes is that we are expecting culture to replicate itself through osmosis, which is, oh, you're just around it and you'll get it. And that does happen. That does happen. But often it's a very slow process. And sometimes people can be around culture for ages and ages, and they can almost be resistant, or they can be stuck in their ways. And it's like, right, okay, is this kingdom culture that you're bringing? Is this the worship that we see in the scriptures, for example? And I think that one of the things that I've learned over the years is that you've got to teach culture, not just assume culture. Oh, right. We'll get there, yes. And that does have its impact. It does have a place. But we also cannot take for granted that we've got to teach culture, that we've got to teach the principle, and then we've also got to teach the outworking of it. So this is what it looks like. This is how you express. So the Bible tells us to love the Lord our God with all our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. So if that's true, we've got to worship, we've got to love God with all that we are. So when we worship, is that something that you're doing? If you're not, this is how you can worship with all that you are. You can actually sing. Yeah. You can actually join in and sing. You can actually lift up your hands. And one of the things I've seen here, even in recent weeks, our worship leader, Dan, did some teaching around worship. And then the last few weeks, we've seen a big change in worship at the church, because he's not just assuming because they're seeing it every week, they're going to get it. He's actually teaching them. This is what worship is, and this is how you do it. And we need to keep coming back to that, keep repeating it, keep coming back to those important principles. Even like you said about, running prayer at a small group or doing things at small group. It's like, don't just assume everyone knows how to share well and that you should keep it within this time limit. Say, hey guys, we're going to share now. And I'm going to ask you all to keep it under 2 minutes as we share, just so we give everyone enough time to share, so that when you do cut in, you've already given a foundation and a basis for the fact that this is what the expectation was. But if you just assume the culture that it's going to happen, so often it will be shaped by their own dispositions and what they come in with, rather than what you led, how the culture should be and how you want it to be.
Yeah, that's really good, Josh. Great points there. I also try and always think about the least in the room.
Very good.
So it's like I might be leading this through. I'm trying to set culture. I'm trying to, we've got a plan. We're going to talk about this, from the Bible, or we're going to, pray together. I'm always aware. You've got to read the room and be aware of the least. And what I mean by the least is the one who is struggling with perhaps confidence. Do they really feel like they're, part of things there? They're new, maybe they're new in their faith. And this person, I'm just aware of how are they interpreting things? How are they hearing this? Am I encouraging them along the way? I'm not going to expose them. I'm not going to put them out there suddenly on their first week or two, but I want to be aware of them. I want to include them. I want to value them in that. And I think that this is you got to do that yourself and help your people to understand that, because that's how you grow groups. When people say, I had a really great time, or, it was, I felt like, part of things. And I remember, obviously, when I was a teenager, being in those situations and being so uncomfortable. So I try and remember what it was like. One of the things I couldn't pray in a group, couldn't pray in public. And that my worst fear is that someone would ask me. So I'm always aware. I don't want to assume that someone might have been around church for some years, but might not have ever prayed out loud. But I've got a mission in my mind, which is I want them to help to break through a barrier. And so part of leading them in that group is I want to see them grow. And maybe how can I help them grow? By not exposing them, embarrassing them, but maybe just encourage them, maybe giving moments where you say, hey, do you know what? It'd be great if you haven't prayed before. We would love to hear. And even if it's a few words, I know that God's going to be so excited about that. And that's how we grew Barbarians as well. We gave opportunity, and we told some of the guys that knew how to do it to almost give opportunity for those that don't normally do it, because the worst thing is jumping in when someone's about, you both go to start. So it's like, let's create a moment specific.
Right.
And not being uncomfortable with that, but just encouraging it and encouraging them after. And I think that as well is thinking of the least, but bringing is almost the tender plant that you're nurturing, and you got culture to bring it, because that's the idea of discipleship, is growing them.
Absolutely. I love that, G, that idea of, creating room for the next ones to come through. If you want to raise the next, if you want to multiply culture, you've got to make space for them to get the culture. So one of the things, like just as you were saying in Barbarians, my guys are firing, they're praying over each other, they're praying again. We've got this great culture where the men are really bringing amazing, powerful prayers. But then often I'll say, right, thank you, everyone. Now, if you've already prayed, thank you for that. I don't want to hear another prayer from you right now, because we're going to give some space to some guys who had never prayed before. So there's guys who are like, I'm going to do it. Oh, I can't. So-and-so's just prayed for a second or third time. So we just create the space for the culture to be able to multiply. Yeah. So they've seen the example. Then we're going to create space, and that allows then for them to be able to replicate. But if you don't have space for them to do it, then how can they do it? It's the same with worship. Sometimes we'll say, hey, I think we had it this Sunday. If you're comfortable, lift your hands. Now, a lot of people, it's like on invitation, it's like, oh, actually, I am ready to do this. But they didn't do it until they got an invitation.
Yes.
And so we've got to keep inviting people to come on the journey of the culture as well. Yeah. So, hey, I hope this has been helpful as we've talked about some of these ideas. I know a lot of people who listen to our podcast are leaders around our church movement. And we just want to equip you and encourage you in this journey. So this was our first episode back. We've got another 7 coming for this kind of series that we're doing. And it's great to be back, isn't it, G? And hopefully this has been a blessing to you today. But we'll be back next week with another episode.
Come on.